Welcome to Graceful Healing, a podcast to get straight talk about healing and living again. My name is Maureen Lake. I'm a holistic health coach, speaker, author, and thyroid disease fighter. Each week, I'll be bringing you graceful conversations to inspire you to seek new ways to hit the reset button to catapult your health and vitality to new levels. Listen in and open your heart to all the new possibilities. Are you ready? Let's do this. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to have Travis join us today. He's the owner of Mindful Productive. And actually, he started as a musician who turned yoga teacher. I can't wait to hear your story, Travis. And now you're a mindful business coach. And if you're ready to have some clarity, confidence, and control without burnout, then you're going to love this interview with Travis. Welcome, Travis. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Maureen. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today.
So I'm fascinated with your personal story. I know you started off as a musician, but I'd love to hear how you started there and ended up where you are now. So help us connect the dots backwards, if you could.
Absolutely. So I grew up, like a lot of folks, in a musical family. Neither of my parents were professional musicians, but there was always music as part of my growing up life. We were always singing, making up songs. You know, we had a piano that was played. Nobody was great at it. But then when I was a kid, I was in choirs growing up and played, took piano lessons like a lot of people. But then when I got to about sixth grade, I started playing the viola, which for anybody out there listening, if you're familiar with the viola, it's a little bigger than a violin, a little lower sound. It's a great instrument. Highly recommend. If you have any young ones who are thinking about picking up the violin, maybe point them towards the viola. It's a cool instrument. Cool. Really beautiful. Yeah. And so I started playing the viola and I really enjoyed that. But I didn't start taking it super seriously until the end of really maybe the last year of high school or so, because I'd been in orchestras and I'd had music teachers all my life, I started getting just more and more inspired by the work that I'd done with those teachers and had a couple of really great conductors who I worked with who inspired me to want to pursue music as a career.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Is this all in Texas where you were living at the time, or?
Yes, in Texas. Yes.
Okay.
And Texas has great music programs. Not to say that there aren't great places around the country and around the world, but the state of Texas has wonderful high school music programs and teachers here. So because I was so inspired by them, I knew I'd always had a passion for music and I enjoyed teaching as a pursuit. So I started studying music in college. Now, to condense the next 10 years or so down, I ended up getting a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in music performance. Yeah.
Good for you. Gosh.
Lots of school.
Yeah.
Lots of school. And, I really did what I can now look back and see that I was very much a perfectionist and a workaholic. I believed at the time, and really it took a long time to get over this. I believed when I started my college life that I was just so far behind everyone else that wanted to be a professional musician that I had to work twice as hard.
Oh, why do we do that to ourselves?
Right?
Yeah.
It's so many of us do that. And at the time, I thought that I was the only one like that. I had no idea this was something that other people experienced. So as a result, I worked way beyond my limits regularly. And because I was at the time young enough and I hadn't been doing it for long enough yet that I could maintain that for a while. But what that ultimately led to was bumping up every year, at the end of every school year, being at this edge of burnout where I didn't care about what I was doing anymore. I didn't love it anymore. And I was just chronically exhausted and cynical. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that then led into during the summer, I would go and play at music festivals all summer. So I'd be working in music there, and then I'd come back the next school year and do it all again. So after 10 years and 3 degrees of that.
Just getting your PhD is so difficult. I mean, I know from my personal experience, I have all the classes, but I've never done the dissertation. So I'm one of those. Yep. But I know how difficult that is to do that. And it's amazing that you were able to do that.
Yeah, and actually, little known fact: in music, our doctorate for performers are actually DMAs, so Doctor of Musical Arts degrees, rather than PhDs. PhDs in music are usually like theory, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Anyway, just a side thing. Not a lot of people know that. So, in case anybody wants to know more about music degrees, we can talk about that another time. So as I got to the end of my doctorate, I was very much at the edge of burnout. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, while I was working on my master's, I lived in Baltimore, and I had a really important turning point in my career. There were several important turning points, and I have a feeling we might talk about a couple of other ones in a minute. But one of them happened when I was living in Baltimore, working on my master's degree, and I was really struggling with a combination, a really unfun combination for a musician, of stage fright and really strong physical tension in my body, which was leading to pain. And which meant that it was getting harder and harder for me to practice more, but I needed to practice more. Because I was a perfectionist, I felt like I needed to work harder, but it was physically starting to take a toll. And I was starting to get near some really serious injuries, which fortunately never came. But that was largely because a mentor of mine, a teacher I was working with at the time, suggested to me that I explore yoga as a possible modality that might help. And she didn't really know a lot about it. She was just like, hey, I see you've got some physical pain. I can tell you're really like anxious all the time. So, maybe check yoga out. Not quite as directly as that, but that was the idea. And I was really lucky. I lived like 4 blocks from one of the best yoga studios in Baltimore. So I went to my first class. And like a lot of folks in their very first yoga class, I picked a class that was too hard, or at least maybe a lot of folks like me who are a little bit overzealous about, doing things in an extreme way. Right. I picked a class that was too hard. And as a result, I barely made it through that class. I, was drenched in sweat in the first few minutes. I nearly threw up. I mean, it was not pretty.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it was a mess. Not to scare anybody away from yoga, because there are lots of classes that aren't like that. But I chose one that was a little too challenging. And yeah, I barely made it out. But the good thing was afterward, I made it through. And afterward, a new awareness started to open in me of what was happening in my physical body. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had been completely shut off from what I felt physically and emotionally, because I was so focused on being perfect and thinking about work all the time, thinking about how was I going to get ready for that next performance? How was I going to practice enough? And I was all up in my head and not aware of what was going on physically or emotionally. So this was where it started to shift. And because it was so beneficial, right off the bat, I was more aware of my body, which meant that I could alleviate pain, and I could move in a way that would help me to both play better on the viola and also just feel better in the rest of my life. That I started studying yoga much more seriously, ended up becoming a yoga teacher pretty quickly. And that was when I started getting much more interested in mindfulness. And I know we'll probably talk about that in a minute too. But after that, to kind of round out the circle, to get to close to where I am now, after I finished my doctorate in music, I knew about 6 months out or so from when I finished that I wanted to start a business around helping folks with overwhelm, with burnout, with stage fright. And that's, as soon as I finished my degree, I launched my coaching business. And several years later, here we are now.
That's quite a journey. Gosh. And so it's because of your becoming a yoga teacher that you learned all about mindfulness, and I'm assuming meditation and lots of other practices that you put into place.
Yes, that was where it started. From there, it's it, like a lot of things, as I started to dip my toe into it, and which started with my yoga practice, then I realized how much there was to learn. So then I went and sought additional training in that. And I hope to continue learning about these things for the rest of my life.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Gosh. So tell me about like your mindfulness training, because I'm fascinated with it. I know I practice it daily, and it's something that a lot of people really don't know that much about. It's kind of interesting. A lot of the women that I work with and that I know listen to this podcast are just kind of dipping their toes into it right now. So can you talk to us about what that means for you and for your practice and your clients?
Absolutely. So mindfulness for me is simply the state of being present in the moment. And while you're there, if possible, practicing non-judgment. So non-judgment is a big topic. Yeah. We could do a whole hour, 2-hour long conversation just on that. But practicing non-judgment being the intent to see what is happening and hold it without the need to judge it as good, bad, helpful, unhelpful, all that kind of stuff. And from there, with that level of awareness, then you can choose. So that doesn't mean practicing non-judgment is embracing things that are hurtful or painful, or the opposite of that, embracing only things that are good or enjoyable, but rather being able to see what is, and then with that awareness, choosing where to act, choosing what to do, choosing how to respond. And it's different from meditation. A lot of times we talk about mindfulness and meditation kind of synonymously, or which is fair because you can do mindfulness meditation. That is a practice. Mm-hmm. That is its own thing. But meditation is really the act of practice. So you might, for example, sit in a chair or on a cushion or on the floor, whatever it is, and close your eyes and then practice a meditation of some kind. Mm-hmm. And there are infinite different meditations you could do, both mindfulness and loving kindness and compassion and all kinds of stuff. It's really fun to dive into. But then with mindfulness practice, you can do that in the context of meditation. So you can sit and practice mindfulness meditation where you're simply engaging with awareness in the present moment. So often we'll use our breath as a point as an anchor point, mm-hmm. where we're observing inhale and exhale, noticing that, and then noticing when other thoughts, emotions, ideas, that kind of stuff comes up. And when it does, just gently, without judgment, noticing those things and then guiding our attention back to the breath. Now, outside of meditation, you can also totally practice mindfulness anytime, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are. And that practice is simply intentionally bringing your awareness, your focus back to what is now. So one of my favorite ways to do that, I have a window right outside my office, and from that window I can see a little tree. It's a young tree. And so if I'm working and I'm noticing that I'm getting very, narrowed in on something or starting to feel like I'm not connected with the work I need to do, or I'm feeling distracted, feeling like I need to procrastinate, anything like that, to recenter, I will just pause for a moment and look out my window and bring my full focus to observing that tree for just what it is, not judging it, not noticing, oh, there's a brown leaf on the tree. I wish that brown leaf was green, or I wish that green leaf was brown, or whatever it is. But just noticing, okay, I see the colors and I see the light and I see the movement. I might observe other creatures or not, but just observing for a moment and letting my full awareness be there. And noticing often in that space, other thoughts will come up. I'll start thinking about work or thinking about the next thing I want to do. And when that happens, just observing that and coming back to my point of focus, which in this case happens to be the tree. And then when it's time to get back to work, which sometimes is a few seconds, sometimes it's a few minutes, then just choosing intentionally as I come back to refocus on another single point. So what is this work thing that I want to do? Or what is this one task I want to take on?
The whole time you were talking, I was looking at my window at my tree. I really was. That was beautiful. So as far to take your analogy of the tree and what you said before about mindfulness, like the state of being present and not being judgmental. I mean, that was like a perfect example, right? You're just like taking it in for what it is and not passing any kind of judgment on it. Correct? Am I correct here?
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you didn't have how do you, I'm trying to figure out how you practice it when, say, something came up in your life that's causing a lot of anxiety and you just can't seem to calm yourself down, or you're getting yourself riled up about it and you want to use mindfulness to help you center yourself again. How would you go about that when you don't? Would you still visualize on something possibly in the environment, or could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's obviously, when I shared with you, I'm kind of going through a little bit of a angst right now with my physical body and a pilgrimage I'm getting ready to walk on. And the anxiety sometimes gets almost overwhelming at times, trying to figure out what I'm going to do about it. And I'm just curious, how somebody that's going through something that's more psychological can use mindfulness to calm themselves, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this is a very deep conversation we're about to have. So just to prepare everyone, this is something that, of course, there are lots of ways to approach this. So I'll give a couple of examples that I think will be helpful in this circumstance, but there are lots of options for this. So when it comes to especially physical things that cause us emotional angst, there are a couple of routes you can take. One, if the experience is not so extreme that you can explore it without feeling completely overwhelmed, if you can feel the experience, if you can observe it without immediately being rolled into a state of panic or worry, then the practice is often to intentionally observe, okay, what is the thing that I'm feeling? Just what do I feel right now? And oftentimes with relatively not intense, and I mean relatively not intense as a lot of things, pain, we can observe, we can see the thing that's happening, we can feel, okay, does this pain have a shape? Like if I could feel it in my body, what is its shape? What is its feeling? Does it tingle? Is it a sharp pain? Is it dull, achy? What is it? And not trying to analyze it, not necessarily trying to diagnose or anything like that, but just observing it for what it is. What is your felt experience? And occasionally in that place, the pain, depending on what it is, will lessen or pass. Sometimes it will grow more intense, but it will be something that we can observe from a place of, present in the moment awareness. So that's one way to approach it. A second way, if the pain or if the emotional experience is extremely intense, then it can be really helpful to intentionally focus somewhere else. And this is getting towards an area that people have different opinions on in terms of mindfulness. But for me, if you're having a physical experience or an emotional experience that is causing you so much pain that focusing on it would be detrimental or would cause kind of a spiraling, then it's helpful to pause and notice and say, okay, I see this thing is happening. So it's a moment of stillness to say, okay, I see this pain, I see whatever it is. And you might even name it internally and say, okay, this is my hip really hurting today, or this is my back, or this is my fear, whatever it is. And then choosing to place your focus somewhere else or choosing to reframe your situation. So, for example, you might choose to engage with your environment by, as we mentioned a second ago, using your sense of sight to engage with what's around you. Or you might because I have a musical background, I love engaging with my sense of hearing. So what can I hear right now? What sounds are there? There are always infinite sounds in the environment. And sometimes, if it's really intense, I think it is totally okay to intentionally move your focus into something else, like listening to a piece of music you really like or a song you really like, or engaging in a physical activity that doesn't cause you harm, but allows you to feel connected with your body. Those are things that can be really helpful. And while it is shifting away from the pain, it is still present in the moment and without judgment.
That's beautiful. I mean, I rely on music a lot in my life as well. I'm not a musician. I wish I was, but I love music and I love listening to music. So that's really helpful to know that you can kind of disengage by that tool, because I find myself personally going to music quite a bit. So it's all about, I just find this fascinating. It's kind of a way to disengage, but still stay in the moment. Am I correct?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a way to simply just choose where to place your focus.
Yeah.
In the same way that when we meditate, for example, one of the meditations I use often is a meditation focused on my breathing. But I could also choose to focus on something else, my sense of hearing, a sense of touch. I could focus on looking at a candle. There are infinite options here. So you can be present in the moment without necessarily having to be present. You don't have to be fully aware and engaged with everything all the time. It can just, if it needs to be something specific to help you feel okay, to help you feel all right, then absolutely, by all means. It's great.
What are your thoughts on journaling? Because again, that's like a modality that some people, use and find as a strength, and other people not so much. And I've always been fascinated by kind of the tools that we we reach for because it has, I think, something to do with who we are. But I'm curious about like your thoughts about journaling. Do you find that helpful with your clients that you're working with? Or is it a tool you use at all? Or?
Oh, yes. Yes. And I agree 100% with the idea that the tools that are most helpful for each of us are kind of unique to us. I mean, not 100% unique, obviously. There are lots of people who journal. But for some people, journaling is the thing that opens up their connection with their awareness. So just the act of writing it, just the physical act of writing allows them to feel more connected. For other people, writing is their least favorite thing to do, whether it's by hand or typing, and they would prefer to never do it ever. and for those folks, you can absolutely speak. You can journal by speaking in a way. It's a different experience, but it can be helpful for you if you do not like journaling. But if you like journaling and that's something that is helpful for you, and for me it is, I find writing, especially by hand, to be particularly useful when I need to process something challenging or when I need to come up with a new plan for something that I'm doing in my life. And in that way, it's really just a way to slow the pace of your experience. And by slowing down, which is necessary for writing, unless you can write really, really fast, by slowing down, it opens up your experience, which makes it much easier to be creative, to be open to new ideas, to ask yourself questions. Because rather than being in a constant flow of moving forward, you have to pause as you write.
That's so
and you have
true.
to take a moment.
Yeah.
So it can be really useful as a mindfulness practice, actually.
Oh, that's so true. And I didn't really stop to think about it that way. Journaling is something that I use quite a bit. And way back in the day when I was a special ed teacher and working with kids, especially when computers were starting to hit the classroom and everybody was using word processing, I always had them step back and actually do the physical act of writing, because there's something that happens neurologically too with brain pathways that you're building by the physical act of writing, I believe. And I think part of that could be this mindfulness that's occurring as you're writing. It's fascinating. I never really stopped to pause and think about that piece of it, but I think there's something to that for sure.
Yeah, and I think anytime that we engage with our world using our senses, and so writing by hand is very much a physical experience. Anytime you can create with your hands, playing a musical instrument is very much a physical experience, but it's totally different than writing. And I think anytime we can engage with different parts of our experience, whether that's through a physical practice like yoga or running or Tai Chi or whatever it is, or writing or sculpting or, engaging in a musical practice, any of those things, allow us to engage with our world in unique ways. And I think it gives us new opportunities to see, okay, how can I be present with this? How can I experience this fully? And I don't know, it's so much fun to explore those things.
Absolutely. So what helped empower you to grow and heal from your stage fright? And I know you talked about yoga and how you incorporated mindfulness, but was there some key things that occurred for you that helped you to grow and heal to become the expert you are now in mindfulness? I just want to make sure we've covered everything for you.
Absolutely. So mindfulness has been a big part of it, but that practice has evolved a lot for me over time. One of the things that when it comes to stage fright, and I'll touch on that very briefly, because even though it's not a big part of my practice now, it was a huge part of my journey, and it was the topic I wrote my dissertation on. So I'm happy to share if anybody out there is struggling with stage fright, whether you're a performer in a more classical sense, like a musician or a speaker, or if you just have to get up in meetings or do pitches or get on client calls, whatever it is, those are performances too. For that, there are a couple things that are really, really helpful. One is developing just a small opportunity before any performance to engage with some kind of stillness. So to have a moment of pause. And to use that moment, and it can be right before you go on stage or get on a client call, or it can be 15 minutes before, 30 minutes before, it doesn't matter. But just to have a moment of stillness to kind of collect and to breathe. I often recommend some kind of breathing practice, either deep breathing, or if anybody is a yogi in here has done alternate nostril breathing, that's a really useful practice for that. but just having a few moments to slow down before you engage in something, kind of a grounding activity. Journaling can also be great at that point too. But then as a secondary practice, more of a long-term practice, and this is very different from mindfulness, but it's really useful for stage fright, is practicing some kind of visualization. So in sports psychology, visualization or imagery, there are lots of different terms, but they all refer to something similar, is a practice where you are seeing yourself perform your best, either in the past, so you're visualizing your past experiences where you've performed your best. So that could be a client call where you really nailed it, or an interview, or a time you spoke or performed where you felt really good about it, and reliving that experience. Or visualizing the future and seeing yourself perform the way you want to perform. Maybe not perfectly. In fact, I would suggest definitely not perfectly, because perfection is not attainable, but rather seeing yourself perform the way you want to perform, and really creating that sense of possibility for yourself and belief that you can do it, and feeling those emotions associated with that. Developing a practice where you do just a brief moment of past visualization and then a brief moment of future visualization. That, if you do it every day for a couple weeks or a month, will pay massive dividends toward feeling more comfortable in performance situations. And that's what helped me. I'm describing the thing that I did that helped me the most. Then for my business, dealing with burnout, dealing with my own overwhelm and perfectionism and imposter complex and all of that fun stuff, there were really a couple things. One is through mindfulness, connecting back with my needs and my sense of emotions. So for me, a big thing that led to burnout was that I became completely disconnected from what it is that I wanted and needed in my life, because I was only focused on the goal, which was to get my doctorate and get a teaching job. That was it. That was all that existed for me. And anything that didn't get me toward that wasn't helpful. So I became completely disconnected from what it is that I felt and how my hopes, my beliefs, what it is I wanted to do with my life, how those things shifted over 10 years. Because over 10 years for anybody, that stuff changes, especially when you're at that age.
Sure.
But I wasn't in touch with that. So my mindfulness practice allowed me to start getting back in touch with that intentionally, with what I was feeling. And then from there, beginning to practice non-judgment with that, and then choosing, okay, I see what I actually believe and what I actually want with my life. So how can I now take an action that'll move me forward? The thing that was most helpful to do that, to build that kind of mindfulness practice, if anybody's trying to do that right now in their lives, is I started just incorporating it as a morning routine. So each day before I started practicing or before I started working, whatever it was, in those few minutes before I started, I just took a moment to center myself and to practice a moment of mindfulness meditation, and then to intentionally ask myself through a kind of question meditation, what do I need right now? And then with that awareness, moving forward and making a plan for the day. And actually, for anybody listening, I'm happy to share that morning routine with you. Maureen, I think we can share that with them.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. So then the other, and this is kind of a thing that has been more recent. So after I started my business, because of my experience with burnout, I was really resistant to setting strong goals for my business. So because I had been 100% goal focused, and that had led me to an experience of burnout, once I started my business, I was just kind of doing the business things. I just started getting clients, but I didn't really have like income goals or aspirations in terms of where I wanted it to go long term, which was fine, but it only worked up to a point. Basically, I felt like, okay, I'm just doing the work. This is great. And because I don't have like this big goal, then I can't fail, right? And I can't burn out because it won't pull me along. So I resisted that. But then I realized that I was really limiting my potential, and I was giving up a strength that I had, which is that when I set goals, I'm very good at achieving them. And I had learned a lot about how to check in with my needs and how to practice self-care so I could balance those things out now. So in my business, a couple of years ago, I started setting stronger, monthly income goals and then longer term goals for my business. And it is just amazing how as soon as I started setting those goals, and they were set mindfully, they were set with awareness, they weren't arbitrary. It wasn't like a lot of folks who were like, oh, I want to make 6 figures in my first year. Yeah. It wasn't that. It was a very specific goal that was set based on what I knew I could achieve and what I needed. And as I started, growing those goals over time, it paid off incredibly. And I've been amazed at how much that has made a difference in my life. And the key has just been keeping it with some level of awareness of what I need. And if I need to adjust a goal, if I need to change an expectation, I can do that because I'm the one who said it, and it's okay.
So tell us about your coaching practice, what you do, who you serve, anything you want to share about it. I do just have to say one thing that, I've been reading your website, and you have a statement here that just captured me. And I'm going to read it before you tell us about your coaching practice. But you stated that you love self-care, but hate how it becomes just one more thing to fail at. I think that is beautiful because, we all want to practice self-care and we all think we're doing such a great job at it, right? But it is just like we set these expectations and then it's like, well, darn, I didn't do this today or I didn't do that today. And then you start feeling like you failed at things. So I just wanted to just throw that in there because your About page has so much interesting information on it. And that's one of the things that I think is so powerful. But I do want you to share your coaching practice and who you serve, who you work with, and all that kind of stuff, because it's so important what you're doing for so many people.
Thank you. And man, that statement about self-care being just another thing to fail at, I wrote it a long time ago and I still feel so strongly about it.
Yeah, because, obviously I do too.
Right, exactly. It's one of those things where, especially for those of us who are very driven, who tend more towards type A, who tend more towards being goal-oriented, who are maybe a little bit perfectionistic or workaholic occasionally. For those of us who are like that, it is so easy to create self-care plans or, new practices that we want to do where the expectations are so high that they are unachievable or they're really not reasonable and they don't fit in with our lives. And I think a big part of that is because we see all these examples in various social media, and a lot of businesses sell themselves this way that they'll teach you the one thing you need to do. And the one thing you need to do takes 3 hours every day.
Yeah, exactly.
So great. So very helpful. So a very strong core aspect of my business is that everything we need to do needs to fit in with our unique circumstances. There is no one size fits all. Everything that we do needs to be done at least with the intention of awareness and sustainability, rather than, okay, so-and-so said this is a great thing to do, so I'm just going to arbitrarily do it. Now, that's not to say that you can't learn a lot by just reading other people's stuff and what they say about what the one best thing to do is. But it is really important to keep that in check with, okay, but does this fit in with my life and my needs and my family and everything else? Because there's a lot there. Now, in my coaching business, I work a lot with folks who are like me, who are ambitious, who are driven, who tend towards overwhelm, and maybe have experienced burnout or in a burnout situation right now. And I help them get the clarity, confidence, and control they need to be able to run their business lives, whether you run your own business or whether you work in somebody else's business. So I work with a lot of coaches, attorneys, mompreneurs, solopreneurs, people who have either no team or small teams around them to help them develop both the productivity techniques that they need in their lives. And again, focusing from a place of mindfulness, from a place of sustainability, from a place of less is often more, not always, but often more, rather than unnecessary complexity. And then helping develop, kind of the larger term, longer term things like, how do I practice self-care in a way that is sustainable? How do I practice self-care in a way that isn't just another thing to fail at? And how do I get what I need so that I can feel good about the work that I do? And then the third big aspect, and this is one of my favorite aspects of the work I do, is helping folks who are struggling with imposter syndrome or imposter complex, helping folks who are in that place of burnout and who need to develop a career plan. Again, whether that's a shift in their own business or developing something else from there.
That's awesome. That's great. The work you're doing is so important. It really is. And I wanted to make sure the listeners know that if you go on the blog post that I'll be have for Travis's podcast, he has a free 3-step mindful morning routine that he wants to share with everybody. So be sure and check that out as well. And thanks for sharing that. That's so important. I know I have my own little mindful morning routine, but it takes 2 too much time. So I cannot wait to dig into yours, because I think that's so valuable. You know, we get caught up in what other people do, and you think, well, now I need to do this, and now I need to do that. And before you know it, it's 40 minutes later, you know, and that's not necessarily what you need, you know, as you're starting your day. So, I mean,
Exactly.
For some people it might work, but for others and myself, it doesn't. So.
No, exactly. And I think it's, you know, as I mentioned before, a big part of this for me is there's no one size fits all. Now, of course, I'm also offering a mindful morning routine. So I'm saying, here's this thing that I think will help. But the idea is here that these are the essentials. Like this is the core. And from that core, if you like, you can expand or you can leave it at that. But this routine takes 5 minutes, maybe 8 minutes if you want to do it very luxuriously. But it takes relatively little time, but you get a huge amount of benefit for the time that you put in. And it's a core practice that I've used now for a long time. And I did it this morning. I do it every day that I work. So I highly recommend if you want to check it out.
That's perfect. That sounds ideal. Absolutely. So my final question for you, Travis, and it's one that I ask everybody that I interview. Knowing what you know now, what's the one thing you'd tell your younger self? If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, get a little tidbit of advice.
Oh, man. There's so much. There's so much I would love to tell myself. But I think, and there's a lot that my younger self would absolutely not listen to. Because, you know, when I was younger, I just had a very strong set of beliefs around needing to work really, really hard. But I think the thing that I would be most beneficial if I could go back and tell myself when I was younger is that it's okay to fail and experiment. It's okay to take your time. And if something takes longer than you expected, it's okay. Mm-hmm. If something doesn't work out as you planned, it can still be either something amazing or just something you learn from or something that's just part of your story. And no matter what, it's okay to experiment. And again, no matter what, perfection is not going to be there. So feel free to play.
That's beautiful. Great advice.
Thank you.
Travis, thank you so much for being on my podcast today. It's been eye-opening for me, and I can't wait to dig into your morning routine and also start some of your practices in mindfulness. I think it'll really be beneficial, not only for me, but for my listeners. So thank you.
You're so welcome, Maureen. It's been a great pleasure.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me today. This episode is brought to you by my book, The Graceful Advocate, Taking Control of Your Life After a Diagnosis of Thyroid Disease. You can find it currently on Amazon. I love it because my friends call it a purse book. They keep it with them when they go to the pharmacy, grocery store, or even to the doctor's office. It's a great little guide to keep you on track and informed. I can't wait for next week when I get to see you back on the pod. Thank you for listening. I really do appreciate you so much. If you ever need someone to chat with about your healing journey, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me through my website at maureenlake.com.